Before the world called him a king, before stadiums screamed his name like thunder, there was just a boy from Delhi, fierce, restless, defiant, a boy with a bat too big for his frame but a heart far too big for the world to ignore. Virat Kohli was not born into privilege. He wasn't handed the keys to greatness. He had to carve them, swing by swing. Dusty Indian pitches where dreams and sweat mixed under the brutal sun. Delhi in those days wasn't forgiving. It was tough, raw, and competitive. Every match felt like survival. Every run was earned. And Virat, even as a kid, didn't just play to win. He played it to dominate. There was no casual, no easy. You could see it in his eyes, that unrelenting fire that made coaches stop mid-sentence. He didn't just want to play cricket, but raw talent means nothing without the storm that shapes it. And his storm came early. When Virat was just 18, his father, Prem Kohli, passed away suddenly. The man who had carried him to training sessions, who had believed in his dream more than anyone else, was gone overnight. Most would have broken. But Virat, he went to play the very next morning, scored 90 for Delhi in the Ranji Trophy. That wasn't about cricket. That was about promise. A promise to his father that he would not stop until the name Kohli meant something. From that day forward, something inside him changed. The fire became obsession. He wasn't just chasing runs anymore. He was chasing legacy. And legacy is not built in comfort. It's fought in rejection, discipline, and sacrifice. When he first made it to the Indian U19 setup, he wasn't the tallest, the strongest, or the most technically perfect. But what set him apart was his attitude, that fierce, almost defiant hunger that screamed, "I belong here." He trained like a man possessed. While others laughed between drills, he pushed harder. He was the last to leave the nets, the first to arrive at the gym. He didn't care about how tired he was. He cared about how far he could go. That obsession found its reward in 2008, the year the world first truly noticed Virat Kohli. The Under-19 World Cup, Malaysia, a young captain leading from the front, not with words, but with fight. Every innings, every run, every scream after a wicket, you could feel something different about him. He wasn't just playing cricket. He was declaring his arrival. When India lifted that trophy, it wasn't just another youth victory. It was the birth of a mentality, a belief that Indian cricket could play not just with talent, but with attitude. Belief had a name, Virat Kohli. The IPL came next. Royal Challengers Bangalore, his new home, his proving ground. It wasn't smooth. In his first seasons, he struggled. Critics called him brash, arrogant, inconsistent. Maybe he was a little of all that. But what people didn't see was the pressure cooker behind those eyes. He was young, impatient, emotional, yes. But he was also learning what greatness demands: control. And control doesn't come easy to those born with fire. He was dropped, criticized, mocked. But instead of fading, he hardened. Every insult became a brick in the fortress he was building. Every doubt became fuel. When the national call came, that blue jersey, it was more than a selection. It was redemption. His first years in the Indian team were a blur of frustration and flashes of brilliance. The seniors ruled the dressing room, and the world didn't yet see him as the next great. But Virat never asked for belief. He earned it. He spent hours in the gym transforming his body. He gave up junk food, late nights, everything that dulled his edge. He studied the best, not to imitate, but to outwork them. He wanted to be the fittest, fastest, fiercest. And slowly, the transformation began. Not just physical, mental. Gone was the reckless boy who swung wildly. In his place was a predator who hunted runs with precision. By the time 2011 arrived, India was on a mission. The World Cup at home. The nation's attention was on Sachin Tendulkar's final dream. Virat Kohli was quietly building his own moment. When he walked out to bat in the final, his calm under pressure spoke volumes. He wasn't there to make a cameo, he was there to contribute. When India lifted that cup, it wasn't just Sachin's farewell gift, it was Virat's initiation. As fireworks lit the sky, India had found its next torchbearer. But destiny doesn't hand over the crown, it tests you first. Virat's true tests were only just beginning. There comes a moment in every athlete's life when potential must collide with purpose. For Virat Kohli, that moment arrived not with fanfare, but with pressure. The years following 2011 tested him in ways numbers could never show. He was no longer the young hopeful. He was expected to deliver. Every match, every series, every time he picked up the bat, the eyes of a billion people followed. Some waited for magic. Others waited for failure. He didn't see fans or critics. He saw opportunity. Kohli didn't just want to play for India. He wanted to define India's modern cricket identity. Aggressive, fearless, ruthlessly professional. This was a new generation of Indian cricket. And Virat Kohli became its face, its heartbeat, its fire. He realized one truth. If you want to survive at the top, you must evolve faster than your opponents can study you. So he rebuilt his technique, trained harder than ever, studied bowlers like an analyst studies war footage. He wasn't reacting anymore, he was anticipating, and soon the results followed. Run chases, that nerve-wracking pressure test of champions, became his stage. He turned the impossible into inevitable. When others saw 300 runs to chase, he saw 30 mini battles to win. When bowlers roared, he smiled. When required raid hits come, his heartbeat slowed. It wasn't arrogance, it was mastery. People began to say it over and over. If Kohli's there till the end, India wins. That wasn't a compliment, it was prophecy. He became known as the chase master. But behind that title lay endless nights of repetition, mental drills, and self-punishment for every lapse in focus. He played every delivery like it was personal, because to him it was. And while the world admired his consistency, few understood was his process. Virat Kohli wasn't born with godlike reflexes. He manufactured them through brutal discipline. He'd wake before dawn, run before sunrise, train until failure, and then train some more. His diet, his fitness, his routines, all sculpted with the precision of a monk and the fury of a warrior. He built a body that could outlast heat, fatigue, but more importantly, he built a mind that refused to break. He said once, self-belief and hard work will always earn you success. But that's not a slogan, it's his entire philosophy condensed into one line. This was also when the baton was being passed in Indian cricket. The giants, Tendulkar, Dravid, Laxman were nearing the end of their journeys. The dressing room was shifting. The quiet era of calm discipline was giving way to something new, raw energy. And Kohli was at the center of that transformation. He didn't hide his emotions. He didn't apologize for his aggression. When he celebrated, it was fierce. When he failed, it was visible. He made intensity fashionable again. To him, passion was not a flaw, it was fuel. He made Indian cricket play with attitude. And the world didn't know how to handle it. 2012, 2013, 20-40 years that cemented his reputation. Hundreds in all formats. Match-winning knocks in impossible chases. He wasn't just playing for records. He was rewriting how consistency looked in modern cricket. Then came Australia. The land of sledges, pace, and fire. For decades, Indian players had struggled to dominate there. But Kohli, he loved walking into hostile arenas. The boosts, the taunts, the quick bounces, they didn't intimidate him. They activated him. He responded the only way he knew, with runs. Tons of them, hundreds in every test. Challenging Australia on their turf, not with words but with the bat. It wasn't just a cricketing performance, it was a psychological statement. India no longer bows down. Every stroke carried defiance. Every celebration screamed, "We are equals now." And under that fire was also purpose. To carry the pride of a billion people who had been told for too long that grace must mean silence. Virat Kohli showed the world that grace can roar. By the mid-2010s, he was no longer just India's future. He was India's present. Captaining the team, breaking record after inning by example. His fitness revolutionized the squad. He set standards no one dared to ignore. Suddenly, players were not just judged by skill, but by conditioning, commitment, mental toughness. The culture changed forever. Under Kohli, Indian cricket wasn't just talented, it was relentless. And yet, all that glory, there was still the boy from Delhi, still haunted by the loss of his father, still driven by that promise. Still the same fire, just burning brighter. But success, as it always does, brings its shadow, expectation. And the higher you rise, the thinner the air gets. For Virat Kohli, the next chapters would test something deeper than his game. They would test his endurance, not of skill, but of spirit. Because when you've conquered the mountain, the next battle is not with others. It's with yourself. There's a moment when greatness stops being about numbers and starts being about leadership. About how you carry others when the weight of a nation rests on your shoulders. For Virat Kohli, that moment came when the captain's armband landed on his arm, not as a gift, but as a burden earned through fire. When MS Dhoni, architect of India's golden age, stepped back, the world wondered. Could anyone possibly fill that void? And the answer came with a stare, a roar, and a clenched fist. Virat Kohli didn't just want to lead. He wanted to transform the very meaning of leadership. He didn't inherit Dhoni's serenity. He didn't try to copy it either. Like himself, passionate, demanding, intense to the point of obsession. He didn't speak softly. He set standards loudly. Every session, every huddle, every over, you could feel his energy pulsating through the team. He believed that the best way to inspire was to embody what you preach. If you tell your men to run harder, you must run hardest. If you tell them to never give up, you must bleed for it first. That's how Virat Kohli led India. Not from behind a desk of strategy, but from the front lines of war. His captaincy was not about comfort, it was confrontation. He confronted mediocrity. He confronted laziness. He confronted every excuse that had ever held India back from being the best in the world. To his critics, he was too aggressive. To his teammates, he was magnetic. He built a dressing room of warriors, tourists in whites, but competitors who walked into foreign stadiums believing they could win anywhere against anyone. And they did. Under Kohli, India became a machine of discipline. Fitness tests became ruthless. Training routines became sacred. He didn't care about reputations. He cared about results. He introduced accountability. You either met the standard or you didn't belong. Not because he was cruel, because he refused to accept the idea that Indian cricket should ever be comfortable. And that attitude began to show in the results. India started winning overseas, in South Africa, in Australia, in England, places that had haunted Indian teams for decades. Now, battlegrounds and India, under Kohli, was no longer a guest. They were conquerors. Let's not romanticize it. Leadership came with a price. Every defeat hit harder. Every loss was amplified. Every gesture on the field was dissected. When you lead with fire, you will always attract the cold winds of judgment. Kohli never hid. He faced criticism the same way he faced fast bowlers. Head-on, unflinching, unapologetic. He wasn't afraid of being hated because he wasn't chasing love. He was chasing excellence. And if you study his tenure closely, you'll see the evolution, not just of a player, but of a man learning to channel chaos into control. From raw aggression to calculated intensity, From emotion-driven to mission-driven, he became the bridge between generations, between the quiet grace of Tendulkar's era and the fierce self-belief of modern India. He carried forward the class but added ferocity. Even off the field, his transformation inspired millions. His fitness revolution wasn't just about cricket. It changed India's perception of athletes. He made professionalism cool. He made self-discipline desirable. Began to realize that greatness is not born. It's engineered through the choices you make every single day. And those choices weren't easy. To live like Virat Kohli meant constant sacrifice. Family time missed, privacy surrendered, comfort abandoned. Every morning began with work. Every night ended with reflection. It's no wonder he said once, if you can't handle pressure, you can't handle greatness. Because that's what his life had become. A constant test of composure under chaos. Even warriors have moments of doubt. Even leaders face loneliness. And as India rose under his command, the pressure multiplied. Billions expected victory every match, perfection every inning. But cricket, like life, doesn't care for perfection. It humbles you when you least expect it. The losses came, the heartbreaks, the ICC tournaments, the finals that slipped away. Each one left a scar deeper than numbers could measure. Yet instead of hiding behind excuses, Kohli faced the camera, owned it, came back harder. That's what true leadership looks like. Not pretending to be invincible, but refusing to stay down. In him, India saw something raw, real, and reflective of themselves. Not a flawless hero, but a fighter who kept showing up. And as the world watched him roar after every 100, after every victory, it wasn't arrogance they were seeing. It was release of everything he had endured to get there. He was more than a captain. He was a symbol of India that refused to be underestimated anymore. And yet, behind all the strength, the man inside was evolving. More grounded, more aware that legacy isn't just built on victories, but on character. That awareness would soon guide him into one of the toughest chapters of his journey, the one where the battles weren't just against opponents, but against his own limits. Because even kings face the question, what happens when the fire that made you starts to consume you? Every hero faces a storm, not of the world outside, but of the mind within. For Virat Kohli, that storm arrived quietly, creeping into the edges of his confidence like a shadow. From the outside, he still looked invincible. The runs, the records, the intensity. But inside, something had started to shift. When you climb too high, the air gets thinner. Every breath demands more effort. Every mistake feels louder. For years, Kohli had lived like a machine, programmed for dominance, fueled by obsession, blind to exhaustion. But even machines break when the system overheats. The pressure wasn't new. He had faced his teens, but now it was different. Now wasn't just about scoring centuries or winning matches. It was about being Virat Kohli every second of every day. He wasn't allowed to fail. He wasn't allowed to rest. He wasn't even allowed to be human. Every time he walked out to bat, cameras zoomed in, waiting, judging, dissecting. Every innings became a referendum on his legacy. Every silence became a headline. And that's the paradox of greatness. The more you succeed, the less freedom you have to fail. He started feeling it. The mental fatigue, the emotional weight. The fire that had once fueled him began to flicker. His aggression still burned, but the joy was fading. There were days when the bat didn't answer. When every delivery felt heavier than it should. When the same drive that once pierced covers now found edges and disappointment. And the critics came crawling out, louder, harsher, more personal. They said he'd lost it. They said he was finished. They said he was distracted. But what they didn't understand was that behind the facade of dominance was a man quietly battling himself. Not for form, for peace. It takes courage to admit that, especially for someone like Kohli, a warrior who had built his identity around control, resilience, and defiance. But the human mind doesn't bend to willpower forever. In one interview, he said something that revealed everything. I wasn't feeling myself. I had lost touch with who I wasn't enjoying the game anymore. That wasn't weakness. That was truth. The kind most athletes are too afraid to speak. In that truth, millions saw them searching. The burnout, the expectation, the crushing need to perform in a world that never stops watching. So he did something few superstars ever dared to do. He stopped. He stepped away from the game, from the noise, from the spotlight. He didn't do it for publicity. He did it for survival. Because sometimes the strongest move is not to keep fighting, but to pause, to breathe, to remember who you are beyond the applause. During that time, Kohli rediscovered himself, not as the captain, not as the cricketer, but as a man. He spent time with family, reflected, reconnected with the simplicity that had started it all. The boy from Delhi who just loved hitting a ball in the park. And slowly, clarity returned. He realized that the pursued greatness had made him forget the joy of the game. He understood that obsession without balance is a cage, no matter how golden. When he came back, he wasn't the same Kohli who left. He was calmer, wiser, more grounded. The fire was still there, but it had evolved. It wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about expressing himself. He began to play with a sense of peace that was unfamiliar but liberating. The smile returned, the body language softened, the eyes still burned, but with controlled intensity. And when he finally scored that century after years of drought, erupted. Not because of the numbers, but because of the story behind it. That century wasn't about runs. It was about redemption. It was the triumph of vulnerability over image. The victory of self-awareness over ego. It was proof to us that greatness isn't defined by how long you stay at the top, but by how you rise after you've been broken. Kohli's comeback wasn't loud. It was mature. He wasn't roaring for validation anymore. He was smiling with understanding. And that's when people realize something profound. The warrior who once fought the world had finally made peace with himself. He showed that mental health isn't a weakness, it's a reality, one that even champions must confront. In doing so, he opened the door for countless athletes and fans to admit their own struggles. He turned pain into perspective. That perspective reshaped his legacy, from being just a cricketer to being a symbol of balance. Because it's easy to fight when you're winning. The true test is fighting when you don't even recognize the person in the mirror. Virat passed that test, not by breaking records, but by rebuilding his spirit. And as he walked back onto the field with that renewed calm, the world could sense it. This wasn't the same young man who screamed at the sky in celebration. This was a man who had learned that silence can roar louder than any victory cry. The comeback was complete, but his story wasn't over yet, because there was still one more chapter left to be written. The chapter where the king, wiser and more composed, would redefine legacy, not as a statistic, but as a lesson. As the roar of stadiums continued to echo through his life, something else began to grow louder inside Virat Kohli. A quieter, deeper voice, the voice of a man no longer chasing applause but meaning. When his daughter was born, that voice became unmistakable. For years, his world had revolved around competition, around numbers, trophies, rankings, and validation. But now, when he held that tiny life in his arms, the game changed forever. Suddenly, the centuries didn't seem as heavy. The records didn't feel as urgent. The man who once lived for cricket now realized that cricket had merely been his path, not his purpose. He began to see life through a new lens. He spoke often about balance, about how fatherhood grounded him, How it reminded him that his identity wasn't limited to what the scoreboard said. He said, "When I look at her, don't think about runs or rankings. I think about what kind of person I want to be." That's the kind of transformation that separates champions from legends. Because success, as the world defines it, is fragile, but impact is timeless. The younger version of Kohli fought to conquer. The man he became fought to inspire. He began investing time in mentoring, in helping younger players deal with the same pressure he once carried. He encouraged vulnerability, communication, honesty, breaking the traditional silence around emotional struggles in sports. He understood now that leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about empathy. He had once led through fire. He led through understanding. His teammates noticed it. The cricket world noticed it. Even his critics noticed it. The same intensity that once terrified bowlers had now evolved into wisdom that lifted others. When he spoke about competition, it wasn't with arrogance anymore, it was with gratitude. He often said that the sport had given him everything, but more importantly, it had taught him everything. It taught him patience when he was restless, humility when he was unbeatable, and perspective when he felt lost. The journey from a boy with raw aggression to a man of discipline and balance became his real legacy. He had transformed from a symbol of ambition into a symbol of evolution, proof that true strength is not about how loudly you fight, how gracefully you grow. Off the field, he began to use his platform for more than personal gain. He spoke about fitness, not as a form of self-respect. He talked about discipline, not as control, but as freedom. He embodied the message that greatness begins in the mind before it ever touches the field. When fans looked at him now, they didn't just see the captain or the batsman. They saw a mirror of their own struggle for purpose in a noisy world. Kohli's story was no longer just about cricket. It was about modern manhood, about how to channel aggression into direction, passion into purpose, and failure into reflection. And while the media often tried to compare eras, to debate who was better, who was greatest, Virat quietly moved beyond all that, because legacy isn't built by comparison. It's built by consistency, integrity, and courage. He began speaking to young athletes not about how to win games, but about how to win their own battles. About how to stay grounded when fame threatens to consume you. About how to stay humble when the world keeps calling you king. There was a profound stillness in his later years, the kind that only comes from surviving chaos and finding peace on the other side. He once said in an interview, "For me now, happiness is very simple. A quiet dinner with family, a day without noise, when I can just be." That's not the language of a star chasing records. That's the voice of a man who has already found what he was chasing all along. He no longer played to prove his worth. He played to express gratitude. Gratitude for the game that had tested him, broken him, and rebuilt him. He had gone from being the fire that lit the team to being the light that guided it. And in that evolution lies his true greatness. Because the most powerful transformation in life is not when you change the world, when you change yourself. As he continued his journey, one thing became clear. The Kohli we see now isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new kind of chapter. One where trophies matter less, but truth matters more. Where numbers fade, but lessons endure. Where legacy isn't measured in records, but in the millions inspired to believe that discipline, passion, self-awareness coexist. And in that quiet evolution, Virat Kohli stopped being just a cricketer. He became a metaphor for every person has ever burned with ambition, stumbled under pressure, and found themselves again through introspection. Because greatness in its purest form isn't loud, it's calm, it's consistent. It's earned And as the sun began to set on one phase of his career, the man who once chased immortality learned that immortality isn't about never being forgotten. It's about leaving behind a mindset that lives forever. That mindset of resilience, focus and growth is the true mark of Virat Kohli's legacy. There comes a moment in every great life when you realize that legacy isn't built in the roar of the crowd. It's built in the silence that follows. When the stadium lights go out, when the cameras fade, the noise finally dies, what remains is the truth of who you were when no one was watching. For Virat Kohli, he was never just chasing trophies, he was building a way of living, a standard, a code, a message to every dreamer who's ever stared at a cracked bat or a torn pair of shoes and thought, maybe I can make it too. From the narrow lanes of West Delhi to the grandest arenas on earth, his story has always been about belief. Belief that the ordinary can become extraordinary, that hunger and heart can outshine privilege and luck. What makes his journey immortal isn't how far he came, it's how many he carried with him. Every boy who plays under the scorching sun, every girl who's told to lower her dreams, every young athlete who's been told, you're not enough, they all look at Kohli and see permission. Permission to fight back. Permission to dream louder. He didn't just change how cricket was played, he changed how people thought it could be lived. His obsession became an anthem. His discipline became a culture, his journey. A masterclass in human evolution. Because Virat Kohli didn't just teach the world how to score runs. He taught it how to live like you mean it. Every time he stepped on the pitch, he wasn't performing. He was preaching the gospel of self-belief. Every stare, every sprint, every dive was a sermon. Refuse to settle, refuse to slow down, refuse to let the world define your ceiling. Maybe that's why he resonates beyond the boundary. Because deep down, we all want to be like that. We all want to find that version of ourselves that doesn't bow to fear or fatigue. The version that fights, that bleeds, that keeps getting up, no matter how hard life bowls its bouncers. When people talk about greatness, they talk about stats, centuries, averages, titles. But those fade. What doesn't fade is impact. Impact is the father teaching his son resilience through a story about Virat. Impact is the young cricketer whispering to himself, if he can do it, maybe I can too. Impact is millions of people learning that discipline is the bridge between dreams and reality. It's not sport, that's transformation. And that's why even when he retires, even when another generation takes the field, the name Virat Kohli will echo like a heartbeat across continents. Because legends don't end, they evolve into ideals. He may one day walk away from the game, but he'll never walk away from the millions he inspired. But his runs will stop, but his message will keep scoring in classrooms, in offices, in homes, wherever someone decides to push harder, stay focused and never give up. That is immortality. Not statues or stadiums, but stories that outlast eras, stories that whisper to the next generation. And there was once a man who refused to bow, and when that story is told, it won't begin with records. It will begin with fire. A fire that started in a young boy from Delhi and spread across the world, not to burn, but to light the way. He'll be remembered not for being perfect, not for being relentless, not for never falling, but for rising with even greater force. Not just as a cricketer, but as a reminder that the mind, when focused and disciplined, can turn impossibility into routine. That's why even now, when he walks to the crease, the world still pauses. Because they're not watching a man. They're watching a movement of belief, a movement of excellence. A movement that began with one dream and became the mirror of a billion. So when the last chapter of Virat Kohli's story is written, it won't end with a period. It'll end with a heartbeat A reminder that legacy isn't about how loud you were. It's about how deeply you were felt. And long after the bat is silent, the roar will remain echoing across generations. Because once in a lifetime, a player doesn't just play the game, he becomes the game. Virat Kohli, the fire that refused to die. Will that redefine greatness? The man who turned discipline into destiny. And that is how a name becomes a legend, and a legend becomes forever.